This is CareShift with me, Sathvik Bilikanti, and today I'm thrilled to welcome Eric Kinariwala, founder and CEO of Capsule. Capsule is redefining how people engage with primary care by reinventing the pharmacy experience from the ground up and creating a digitally enabled, patient-centered platform that makes managing medications effortless and personalized. From same-day prescription delivery and transparent insurance navigation to seamless care coordination and technology-powered adherence tools, Capsule removes friction throughout the patient journey so care teams and patients alike can focus on health, not logistics. Capsule has raised over $600 million in venture funding and achieved unicorn status, and they're backed by leading investors including Thrive Capital, Durable Capital Partners, Copt Enterprises, and Bally Gifford. Eric is such a cool guy, and I truly learned so much. It was incredible to have a recording with him, and I feel so privileged to do this and learn from amazing people like him. Eric, it's amazing to have you on the show, so thank you for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, man. I mean, going kind of right into the juices, you guys all work mostly with pharmacy and prescriptions. And, recently I saw a lot of data that says that patients are still abandoning prescriptions. There's still high rates of doctors wasting time with refill calls. Like, why is now the specific moment for a tech first pharmacy to capture real share in the market right now?
Yeah. And I'd say I'd say not only is now the right time, I think that the time has been over the last 10 years, and we were certainly early and I'd say pioneered a lot of the advances in digital pharmacy when we started the business about 10 years ago. But I just take you back to how we started the business, and that'll give you some insight into like why now and why we think the market is today, more ready than ever for alternative ways for people to get and manage their medications. But I started the business we launched the business in 2016, and the kind of the quick origin story is, I had what I thought was like the world's worst trip to the drugstore, where like everything you can think about going wrong went wrong. And coming out of that experience, I kind of asked myself this like really basic question that I think a lot of entrepreneurs ask, which is, why is it this way? Why is it so screwed up? How did it come to be like this? And most importantly, like, is there a way to potentially make this better? And the answer to all of those things are complicated. But the answer to the last one is like, absolutely, there's a way to make all of this friction for the consumer and the doctor a lot better. And one of the things that we really appreciated is that the retail pharmacy industry hasn't changed in like 50 or 100 years. And it by and large looks the same today as it did, in the 20s and 30s and 50s and 60s and 70s, as the industry was really proliferating. And a lot of that is because of one is like a lack of really modern technology. And two is a business model that has really forever been predicated on getting people into stores and getting you to buy a bunch of other things that are in and around the prescription. And the third is that as healthcare has become more complex, it's absolutely a multi-stakeholder process. And so when you think about just the journey of getting a prescription, it starts with your doctor writing a prescription. It goes to the pharmacy. Your insurance company is involved in that. The drug maker is involved in that. There's a drug wholesaler that's involved in that. And all of those participants need to be really tightly coordinated to be able to create a really seamless experience for the consumer. Historically, the way the industry has been set up is no one has really been paying attention to how all of those stakeholders interact. And that creates a ton of friction, particularly for the consumer and particularly for the doctor.
Yeah, and you mentioned how complicated this whole system is right now. And as you were definitely getting into the roots of it from the very beginning, like 10 years ago, I bet it was super common. Like, where do I even start? And you were coming from like that private equity background. And a lot of startup founders may be coming from the patient side, where they're like, dang, this is so much that I didn't even think about. What am I getting myself into? Like, I know this is a big problem, but like, what am I doing? Like, how did you first start off, like getting that problem and then kind of setting it up into learning what to do? Was it from customer insights? Like, how did you kind of navigate the complexities of pharmacy and all of that leading with prescriptions?
Yeah, so I spent the early part of my career as an investor, both in public markets and private markets, and I'd never actually done anything with pharmacy. Did a little bit in healthcare, did a little bit in retail, did a little bit in consumer and and technology. And so looking back, our business at this like perfect intersection of consumer and retail and technology and healthcare. A combination of one, just getting out and talking to consumers and understanding what is their experience going to the pharmacy, how do they use the pharmacy, how do they interact with it, what are things that are high friction for them. And then very quickly we understood that physicians and their staff had really big friction points. And so firsthand speaking with doctors and their staff and really understanding what are their workflows and what creates friction and how can we help them deliver better access and patient care so that the staff can spend time on other things. Consumers and patients can get their medications more efficiently and more quickly. So some combination of actually talking to customers, which I think is always like the most important thing, because you can kind of read, you can read all day and tell yourself a story, but people that are
Right.
actually in it day to day are the ones that are going to tell you where the friction is.
Right. I'm a startup founder myself where I built a solution in kidney care where we kind of learned very fast where and specifically, for example, in dialysis, where like a lot of these like dialysis organizations are going into the incentives of at home dialysis care. And you guys were big advocates for like at home, making it very leisure for the patient to get prescriptions, whether to their house or making it very simple without the cost of friction. How did you kind of plan that out overall, and how did that process look like kind of navigating through kind of advocating for like an at-home type of system?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think one of the things that we saw, 10 years ago was that we have a belief that in all categories, non-experiential local retail is going to live on your phone. And what that means is storefronts on street corners that don't actually provide an experience, you're gonna interact with them through your phone. And so we think things like bars and restaurants and salons and cinemas will always exist because they provide an experience. But a lot of the storefronts that you see are effectively just local warehouses where you're the warehouse worker, right? You're going through the aisles and actually putting things in your shopping cart and checking out. And I think that has played out. If you think about 10 years ago, companies like DoorDash and Uber and Instacart and GoPuff were just starting to sort of take off. And our belief has always been a couple things. One, it shouldn't be easier to do all the other things that you do in your life, like getting groceries or booking a flight or banking or getting a car to come get you. Those things shouldn't be easier than the most important thing in your life and your family's life, which is your health. And the ability to engage with your healthcare should be as simpler or simpler than all these other things you do in your life. So that was sort of one guiding principle. The other principle was that when we started unpacking, like, well, what are the actual friction points for consumers and doctors in pharmacy? And that's everything from persistent out of stocks, like 40% of the time you go to your pharmacy, your medication's out of stock. You actually don't know the price of the medication until
Right.
you've waited in line for an hour and like, actually gone to the counter. The fact that there is like an average wait time that can be up to an hour, all of these different things doctors deal with like an infinite number of faxes that they have no idea what to do with. They don't have the ability to know what insurance you should have or what pricing is. One of the things we realize is like a lot of those, not all of those problems, but a lot of those problems actually just tie back to the model of having 10,000 stores everywhere, and operating those 10,000 stores on technology that was built, you know, in many times like before the internet. And so one of the things that we realize is one, people don't want to go and interact. There's no experience in going to the pharmacy and waiting in line. And you should be able to do that the way you do everything else in your life. And the other is like one of the ways to actually solve a lot of these friction points is to turn the model upside down and say, look, I don't actually need 10,000 stores. That's not a feature of the model. That's actually one of the things that causes a lot of the friction that exists today.
Yeah, and I guess, and I assume this kind of changes the business model over time, kind of doing this kind of incentive approach when patients are at home. How did you have to navigate from the beginning of when you started Capsule to now, like the current business model? Like, how did it change over time, and what did you learn through that?
I'd say like I'd say that I'd say the business model has been relatively consistent over time. I'd say that maybe a couple things that we've evolved as we've learned. One of the things that we've really learned is that we really believe that doctors are essential as quarterbacks of the healthcare journey, and doctors are increasingly being asked to do so many different things by any variety of stakeholders, whether that's the insurance company, whether that's like a health system they're affiliated with, whether that's all sorts of different things. They're just in many ways overwhelmed and bombarded with information and things they need to do, and they're looking for partners that can help alleviate that burden for themselves, but also help them deliver better patient care. And so one of the things that we've done over time is we've really built out a very robust suite of products, software products for physicians, to help streamline,
Yeah.
all of the things that them and their staff face in terms of getting and helping their patients get managed right, prescribed refills, initial prescriptions, all of those things.
Right. So
And
go ahead. Sorry.
no, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, like, what are those, I guess, you kind of mentioned that there's a big gap, and there definitely is still a big kind of gap where physicians are still very overwhelmed with a lot of the kind of aspects of clinical care. And not just that, but also, as you mentioned, in pharmacy, kind of prescribing, refills, et cetera, being overwhelmed by patient calls and missing those. How did you guys kind of figure out that that was a core problem? And how did you guys figure out this is going to be a what you guys built is going to be a coherent solution to that? What was that kind of process like?
Yeah, the initial process was pretty interesting. I mean, if I go back all the way to like the very, very early days,
Mhm.
like a lot of companies, we started out, it was pretty organic demand. Like the first people that used Capsule were people we knew
Okay.
as consumers. And, they were using it and they had a great experience and they started telling their friends and family about it and they started using it. And it turned out like one of those friends and family was a physician. And the doctor was like, listen, if you think this problem is really bad for you as a consumer and you go to the pharmacy once or twice a week, just think about me and my staff. We're interacting with this problem 20, 30, 40 times a day. And
Yeah.
all of the things that go wrong for you, the consumer at the pharmacy counter, eventually roll back up into my and my staff's lap. And we're really ill equipped to deal with that. Things like, hey, I'm at the pharmacy counter and the medication's out of stock. The first thing you do as a consumer is you pick up your phone and you call your doctor. You're like, "Hey, I'm at the pharmacy. Can you find me another pharmacy that has it?" And the doc's like, "No, I don't have any ability to find another pharmacy for you that has it in stock." Or you get to the pharmacy counter and they're like, "Oh, your insurance doesn't cover it and it's not on formulary." And you're like, "What's a formulary? I have no idea what this means. Let me call my doctor and see if they can explain it to me." And the doctor's like, "Look, I have no idea what drug, Aetna covers versus what United Healthcare covers versus, whatever. I'm not equipped to help you do that. I'm sorry, right? And there's all these different things that we started learning about as we started speaking with physicians and their staff around what that looks like, and then we started building solutions that kind of help provide visibility, help give the patient more control over a lot of those friction points.
Yeah, yeah, and we see it now. I mean, there's so much friction. Patients are waiting in lines, chase down refills, and as you mentioned, doctors are kind of going through the same kind of effect where they don't. I can't say that they don't have the lack of education, but they just don't have the time to put in the extra work for that patient that just called because they wanted to get a new prescription, and
Yeah.
then the nearby pharmacy.
And not only it's really not even do they not have the time, it's that they just don't have the tools to help. They're ill-equipped to help. There's not transparency, visibility in connecting the different participants in the chain, right? The doctor only has so much visibility into what the insurance company is going to cover and what it's going to cost, let alone are there other ways to help with costs like coupons from drug companies or patient assistance programs. The doctor only has so much visibility into whether the pharmacy that the consumer chose actually has the medication in stock. Is the pharmacy even open? What are the hours that the pharmacy is open? Like, all these different things. And so there has to be a solution that streamlines all of this to the benefit of both the consumer and the physician. And that's what we've built
Right.
at Capsule.
And I'm curious though, and this might be a stupid question, is like how much of a, I guess, a real world impact does it have, I guess, on patient health and physician productivity? Like, what does that kind of burden look like? And, maybe by 2030, this definitely might be getting worse. Like, what does that kind of impact look like, I guess, in health wise and productivity wise? And maybe you can kind of cite kind of things that you found at Capsule that kind of made a significant impact to your physicians' productivities and things like that.
Yeah, so one of the numbers that we share is that what we see is that people are 50% more likely to fill their medication when it runs through Capsule than traditional channels. And that makes sense. When you reduce the friction of doing something, people do more of it. This happens to be just a good thing that you want, people to do more of when you reduce the friction of doing that. So I'd say like that's one very tangible sort of healthcare outcome that we drive. And then on physician productivity, 20% of the doc and the staff's time is spent on pharmacy related administrative items. And we're able to, by making things simpler for the consumer, we're also able to bring that percentage of time they're spending on admin things down like pretty meaningfully.
Yeah, right. And when it comes to kind of that physician kind of overload, as you mentioned, what how did that look like at the beginning of Capsule to now? Has it increased? And maybe this can tie into AI, but like how with the overabundance with AI and the influx of the amount of tools that these providers have to look at or kind of analyze for potential use for their own practice or for their own clinics, how has the problem that you initially thought to what it is now? Like how does it currently look?
Yeah, that's such a thoughtful question. I would say that I'll kind of answer two separate parts of your question. The first question, in terms of like how has the burden evolved, at least specific to pharmacy. Well, one of the things that we've seen over the last many years is that pharmacy is becoming more complex in just about every aspect of it. And so I'll give you a couple of examples. One is that there's an increasing number of just places that a consumer can get medications filled. And so there's more fragmentation, right? Um, 50 years ago or 30 years ago, there were drugs and there was a corner drugstore, and everything that you could possibly get, you could get at your corner drugstore. And as science has advanced, now you have specialty pharmacies that handle things like biologic medications. You have compounding pharmacies that can handle things that are, custom made to the patient. You have mail order pharmacies. You have all these different ways that you can actually get a medication depending on what it is.
Right.
So I'd say that's one kind of dimension of increasing complexity. The other is that the number of ways that you can pay for something has really changed. And I think that's in flux. If you look at some of the things the administration's trying to do now around drug pricing and most favored nation and Trump RX,
Mm,
that's one slice of that. But if you get a medication prescribed today, there's all these different ways you could use your insurance. You could use your insurance and a copay card that the drug company has. You could just pay out of pocket at a direct to consumer price. You could go to Lilly Direct. You could use like a good RX card. Like there's just like an increasing number of permutations of how you might be able to pay for something. And so if you kind of overlay those two things, you've now got a whole bunch of different places where you either have to or could obtain your medication. And then you've got a whole bunch of different ways that you could pay for those things. And then you got to kind of put those things together in terms of, well, what's the right thing for this patient, this medication, at this time. And that's where I think AI can be really helpful in terms of being able to help guide or navigate the consumer into, hey, this is actually like, given all of these different options, like this is the best thing for you. That's going to help you get this medication the fastest and at a price that is, the best for you. And I think there's more to come on that, but there is, in the absence of a solution and technology that Capsule has built, the doctor is now faced with trying to help the patient navigate all of this complexity. And, you just think about like a GLP-1. I mean, there's like 15 different combinations of like where and how you could get a GLP-1 depending on whether your employer covers it, insurance, whether you're going to pay out of pocket, whether you're going to get a compound, whether it's a branded one, which branded one it is, whether you want it to get it today, whether you're okay getting it mailed to you. Like, and docs, unfortunately, I think the stat still holds. The average doctor spends about the average primary care doc, I think, spends about 7 minutes, in an exam room with their patient. We think it's unfortunate if half of that time is spent, dealing with the administrative nature of pharmacy. Like you want your doctor really understanding who you are and your lifestyle and your motivation so that they can help be a coach so you can live a better, healthier life, not having to help you navigate, the opacity and the complexity of the US pharmaceutical system.
right. How about accessibility? I mean, we've seen now with the increased use of making, like, for example, primary care much more accessible through telehealth, right? Like, we see a lot of these companies that are making it 10x easier to just get a prescription online without even going to your doctor. How does that transform how Capsule is going to work? And maybe this could be the potential future of not even going to the doctor and kind of just getting that prescription online, and then you're good to go, and then you have to go into a specialty practice maybe in person. But like, how does that kind of transform the everyday business of Capsule? Is there any kind of different kind of avenues that you guys are looking at as well for that?
Yeah, I think it's interesting in terms of asynchronous telemedicine to get a prescription. Uh, I think there's been a lot of consumer adoption in a handful of categories for that. And I think there's also like some amount of controversy around whether that's the right thing. I think the answer is like, it's hard to talk about generalities. And it sure feels like there's a category of drugs where they're pretty low risk,
Mm,
and you might not need to have a full consultation with a doctor to get those approved, and you should be able to, dramatically increase access to them. And then I think there's a set of drugs that you probably shouldn't be able to fill a form out and get the medication.
yeah.
Like, right? Like these things have side effects. They're, could be addictive, like whatever, right? There's like a whole bunch, and there's some, not so great stories that have played out on the telemedicine side in terms of increasing access to things that perhaps shouldn't have had access increased. And, it makes sense that your doctor really needs to vet, whether these drugs make sense for you or not. And so the answer is I think it depends on what the medication is and what the use case is for it. I think we are believers and have always been believers that anything that makes things simpler for the consumer, makes it easier for the consumer, and increases access to the consumer is good. And we're going to participate in all those things, like as it makes sense
Right.
for us to do that.
Right. And has
And you
the
still see, I will just note, like, even with all of
yeah,
the rise of telemedicine is still only like 4% of like physician visits. And so the vast majority of people are continuing to visit their doctors in person. And the vast majority of prescriptions are being written, in physical doctors' offices as distinct from telemedicine. That might change over time, but I think it's going to be really dependent on what what the use case is and what the intent is for that person and what you're kind of getting. Because I think some of these drugs, you want somebody by your side helping you
yeah,
navigate. Because I think getting the drug is one thing, but then when you start taking it and you start feeling nauseous, you start feeling dizzy, or your stomach gets upset or whatever, like you want to be able to have the kind of support and
yeah.
navigation around that, right? And so I think one of the things that's often missing from really transactional telemedicine is that layer around, kind of ongoing support. And so I think it just depends on what the use case is.
Right.
If I need a Z pack because I have the flu, like it's probably fine to do that in an async telemedicine form. If I'm trying to go on a GLP-1 for the first time and I'm diabetic and I have never been on it and I take 3 other medications, you might want something more intensive, whether that's virtual or not. I don't know. It's not, I don't think it's necessarily about in person and not in person. I think it's about transactional versus, ongoing relationship. I think that's maybe a better dimension to think about.
And that specific, what you harped on there when it comes to like, I guess that not really changing, and that makes complete sense. Do you think that, since larger kind of these clinics are still mostly running on old systems and legacy systems overall, like how do you think that's going to kind of change over time? How do you see Capsule playing in that effect as well, more on the pharmacy level of stuff instead of obviously the management, kind of like the front end, back end stuff in healthcare, which, but like more on the pharmacy side, do you see Capsule kind of making a big effect, kind of targeting these huge legacy systems? And I'm assuming you guys
Yeah.
are, but like,
Yeah. Yeah, I'd say 2 things. I'd say on the pharmacy side, we've rebuilt all of that from the ground up,
yeah,
with our own technology to streamline all of those things so that we were able to deliver really personalized experiences, both for consumers and also doctors and also drug companies, and kind of partner with all those. And you can only do that if you have like really flexible modern technology. And we've done that over the years. I would also say that we what we're seeing in the market today is that there is a lot of energy around modernizing physician office technology across all dimensions, whether that's phone calls, whether that's practice management, prescribing, refill management, all of those things. And I think we already have, a pretty robust solution to help with some of that is more relevant to the pharmacy and prescribing side. And I think you'll continue to see, at least on the doctor side, I think there's a lot of folks trying to help independent and large practices modernize. I don't know what the large pharmacy chains are going to do. I think it's a very difficult problem to modernize technology that is built in the 80s that you run 10,000 in all sorts of different environments. Like I think that is a very difficult technology challenge to solve. And
yeah.
I'm glad that we get to compete against that versus having to solve that.
Right. I mean, that's difficult. I mean, just kind of like in general, is right now, it's the slowest adopters to AI right now, and it's because of the amount of data that they have collected for vast amount of years that they can't even translate for more on the automation purposes. That makes a lot of sense. But like, how about like in Capsule specifically? How did you guys become an AI first company, kind of starting from 10 years. What was that adaptation look like with your team, with the environment, with the customers? Like, and then I guess my follow on question would be like, how did customers react with automation, like this AI wave that you guys
Yeah.
kind of come into?
I'd say there's two pieces to it. I mean, like everybody, like the technology is changing so fast. I think we are doing our very best to keep up, and I think the team has done a really phenomenal job staying at kind of the frontier of how to apply how to apply the advances in the technology to solve like real problems for consumers. I think, look, my perspective is that I don't think your customer cares whether you're using AI or not, right? Like your customer is looking for an outcome.
Yeah.
Like, and I'm just like as a personal example, like if I fire up like an Uber, later today, I don't do I care if Uber is using AI or not? Like, not really. I just want the car to show up in 2 minutes and the driver to be polite and safe and the car to be clean and for it to get me from point A to B in like a timely, affordable fashion.
Yeah.
And if Uber needs to use AI to make that happen, like great. And if Uber can do that without AI, like also great. Like I don't know that I as a consumer care that much. And I think that that is sort of uh, our perspective with our own customers, both consumers and also physician and physician practices. Like, I don't know that the doctor really cares that the doctor's looking for her problem to be solved, not, I don't know that I don't think that, I don't think she cares whether it's AI or not. Right. And so I think what we're really excited about and what we've done is, I would say two things. One is like, where does AI enable you to deliver value and new product experiences to your customers that were not possible before? And so I think the first wave of what we saw and the way we adopted it too was a lot of internal application of where can you take routine, repetitive, rote workflows and apply AI to make those faster, better, cheaper, more consistent. And I think that story is, like pretty well disseminated in a lot of different industries. And we have more to do there. And the team
Yeah.
is doing, I think, a very good job of doing that. I think that's all fine. I think that's, at this point, I would say like pretty obvious. What I think is less obvious and what is more exciting is, well, what are all the things that you wanted to do, but you couldn't do and AI unlocks? Like, what are net new product experiences that you can offer because you have, infinite intelligence like on tap? And I think that is where we're spending a lot of time with our customers and really understanding, well, what are problems that like weren't solvable before? Not even, maybe it's like you didn't even have a human in your office doing this. Like you didn't even know that this was a solvable problem, but
Yeah.
because the technology has gotten so good, there is now a solution that's like available to do that. And so I don't, I think the first wave of this stuff is going to be all like, let's automate like let's automate like healthcare admins
Right.
25% of the spend. Let's automate all of that and everything will be amazing. Like maybe, but what I think is more cool is, hey, like here's this thing, doc, that you didn't even think about doing that's going to create immense value for you, your staff, and your patients. And I think that's where it's going to get really, really fun and exciting. I'd say in terms of adopting it, our product and eng teams were the first adopters. But one of the things that I'm seeing now that's pretty neat is other teams in our company, legal team, HR team, finance team, are really leaning in as the tools have gotten better and more accessible to non-developers to be able to do, things in a new and efficient way. And so that's pretty fun to see as well.
No, I bet. How have customers kind of reacted to using Capsule? Did they have to do any kind of employee changes or maybe, do anything on their end for to kind of because they're adopting Capsule, which probably can do a lot of couple automations for stuff that they
Yeah.
usually have on there. Like,
We
how
have
did
a bunch of different ways that we work with customers. Certainly one way is that we can integrate with, we integrate with, EMRs.
yeah,
And I think our belief has generally been that people, particularly physicians, particularly in healthcare, people don't like their workflows changed. And
yeah,
so I think we're probably believers that you need to make your solution work within the existing workflow versus trying to create new workflows, because doctors already have so many workflows. They already have so many portals to log into. They already have, all these things. And so I think if you're really trying to solve their problem, I think the solution needs to make the existing workflow better, or needs to be kind of pretty tightly intertwined with the existing workflows versus trying to create net new workflows.
yeah, and kind of addressing a point we talked about in the beginning were kind of addressing the at-home care, and the fact that you guys still have that human touch, the courier still has to come deliver the medication. Will this be automated at one point? We kind of this is interesting to think about is how will that work over time? Like, and like when the patient doesn't even have to leave their home, as we talked about, but still a person has to come in, take
Yeah.
their time, and deliver this. How can this work? And you know,
I think there's two ways.
yeah,
I don't think the technology and the cost curve is there yet. One is drones. And I think drones are pretty exciting. And I think you're starting to see a couple of companies start deploying, at commercial scale in a couple of markets on the drone side. I think we're, you know, we're we're monitoring, I guess, like what that looks like and how that might be part of our, delivery mix in terms of where we can deploy those. I don't think it's quite there yet. And the other, which you're seeing kind of more innovation on the food delivery side, small package side is, there's a bunch of companies working on effectively, like I would call them autonomous kind of, little autonomous vehicles. I don't know what they call them.
right, right,
In Miami, you can see these deployed on the streets where there's little things that are kind of running around and doing that. And so I also don't think those are quite prime time yet for mass adoption. But those are the two things that we're seeing in terms of how that last mile logistics potentially benefits from automation and technology. So I think we're definitely watching optimistically that you
yeah,
can deliver. I think for us, it's again like there's certainly like an efficiency part for our business, but a lot of it's like how do you continue to make the experience better and more seamless and tighter for the consumer. And again, I don't know. I haven't seen, I don't know all else equal. If someone's telling you this is going to come at 2 o'clock, whether a human drops it off or a drone drops it off, I don't know that I care.
right,
I just care that it came at 2 o'clock and the right thing is in the right order.
right,
And so I think there's also sort of we're sensitive to like where is technology both better for the consumer and allows, maybe us to have more efficiency, but those two things have to intersect versus just like this is technology for technology's sake.
exactly.
There has to be like some actual benefit to the consumer that the consumer cares about.
Right. And this is kind of like interesting to think about because you guys started off as a consumer play at the very beginning. You guys are now like very kind of both. And that specifically, how has it kind of worked, kind of targeting both, I guess, on the B2B side and the consumer side? And how did you kind of figure out, like, from the beginning to now, like, this specific ROI kind of capturing for each segment, knowing what each needs and things like that? Like, how did that change over time?
I would say the business has for a very long time been both sort of there's always been a kind of direct to consumer brand element to the business. Like it's a high trust category. You're
Yeah.
something you're putting in your mouth, you're putting in your family's mouth, right? Like so there needs to be a high degree of trust. And we've invested a fair amount over the years in making sure that Capsule has a trusted known brand. And then we've also, I think that the set of products we offer has evolved, but we have always had some sort of engagement with physicians and large physician groups over time. I would say that that is significantly more software enabled or technology enabled, over the last couple of handful of years than it was maybe when we started. But the business in some ways is, B2B or B2B2C. Like ultimately it is a consumer business, but it is also a multi-stakeholder business where there's more than the consumers involved and more than the consumer has pain. So I'd say like we've always believed in both. And ultimately, there's a flywheel. Like the more consumers that know about Capsule, the more doctors that know about it. And the more doctors that know about it, the more consumers know about it. And so we've always kind of thought about those things as being kind of part and parcel of the same kind of growth motion.
I mean, in healthcare, though, like trust is such a big kind of component. I mean, anything dealing with consumer, there needs to be high trust, obviously. And how did you kind of deal with that, like, kind of segment of not people probably not believing in what you guys, the capability of what Capsule can bring to the table for patients and their families? And then how did that kind of change over time, when patients were like, okay, now I can slowly trust what you're doing and kind of use you guys for the max effect and for the
Yeah.
benefit.
I don't have a novel answer there. I think it's like every other technology adoption curve. Like you have early adopters and mid adopters and late adopters, and you have to really earn the right. You have to earn the right to expand frequency and usage, both with your existing customers and additional customers. And so if the first set of people use Capsule and had a terrible experience, the next set of people are probably not going to use it, and the existing people are probably going to not use it as much. And so ultimately, I think you have to deliver a really high quality experience that creates value consistently for folks. I would say like one of the things that's really important in our business and in all businesses that are high trust is like consistency of the experience and meeting the promise that you set for the customer are really important. Those are the things that build trust, right? Like if I tell you I'm going to do something and then I do it, you trust me a little bit. And then the next time, if I tell you I'm going to do something and I do it, you trust me more. And the third time and the fourth time and the fifth time, like that trust sort of builds. And that's true for companies and that's true for products and that's true for humans, across those three things. And so that's sort of how we think about the journey to building trust is you have to do what you say you're going to do and you have to keep doing that over time. You have to earn the customer's trust with every interaction that they have with you. And it's easy to break that trust and it's hard to build it.
And do you guys still do mostly a lot? Is it mostly network effects now to kind of get more on the B2B side, or has it been a lot still cold calling, cold email? Like, do you still use the founder led sales still, or is it still mostly just going?
Everything,
Yeah.
everything, man. There's a million doctors in America. So
Yeah.
we get a fair amount of inbound because people are really excited about how we can help their patients and their practice increase access and streamline admin burden. So we get a fair amount of referrals, we get inbound, and yeah, like we want everyone using Capsule. Like we believe it makes the like at the risk of sounding a little like we believe everyone should use it because it's better, and we think every consumer should use it and every doctor should use it. And so we're aggressive on all fronts of getting the word out.
Right. Kind of going now into the policy kind of landscape here. I'm very curious now. You mentioned Trump RX and all of these things. What does that kind of look like? And kind of tying in, Mark Cuban's kind of cost plus and all of this stuff that he's also working on. How does that kind of tie in into what the future of pharmacy will look like? I mean, it is very complicating right now for patients to actually get quality kind of judgment of how much they're paying, that kind of abundant like burden that they have. How will this kind of change in like 5, 10 years from now and using what you guys have and others as well?
Yeah, I don't know is the short answer. What I do know is that to the extent that there continues to be sort of fragmentation and proliferation in pharmacy, and there continues to be new models emerging, whether it's Cuban, whether it's Trump RX, whether it's direct to consumer from drug companies, whether it's acing telemedicine, like all these different things, that the more fragmentation there is, the more need there is for someone to help consumers and physicians and the staff make sense of all of that and navigate all of that complexity. So I don't ultimately know where things are going to shake out. And certainly there are arguments to be made that drug companies really want to go direct to consumer and simplify the supply chain for any variety of reasons. There's a lot of reasons why that might happen. There's a lot of reasons why that might not happen. Employers are a big stakeholder in all of this because, a lot of people get insurance through their employer. And so my expectation is near term, there's probably a lot of experimentation with a lot of different models, and that can perhaps increase the confusion and complexity and make, what we've built at Capsule more valuable over time. I think there is, like on the pure policy side, like I do think there is some trend towards effectively like net pricing for drugs. And so for a long time, including today, the vast majority of drugs kind of operate on like there's a list price and then there's this whole mechanism of rebates that happen kind of after the fact that bring whatever the list price is down by, 30, 50, 60, 80%, depending on who's paying for it. And there's a lot of opacity and complexity and middlemen and people
Yeah.
taking a little bit of a vig, around that. I do think there is some movement towards saying, why are we setting the price at 1,000 only to net out at 300? And everyone's taking 5 or 10 or $50 in the middle. Like, why don't we just price that thing at 300 and just make this look like every other category of consumer commerce? There's like a lot of logical arguments. Like we're believers in that, right? Like we're believers in simplicity and transparency and think that would be, generally like a good thing. And I think you're starting to see like the early days of sort of some of that starting to happen. Some of that is catalyzed by the administration. Some of that is catalyzed by GLP-1s. Some of that's catalyzed by the drug companies themselves, employer. There's a bunch of different forces that sort of want that. But I think for a long time we believed when somebody asked me that question generally, like, hey, how do you think like the supply chain or the industry structure is going to evolve? When people asked me that question 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago, the answer I would give is I don't think it's going to change that much because everyone, while they say they're unhappy, is in some sort of like unhappy, happy, like equilibrium. But I think there's a couple things, both regulatorily, and I think GLP-1s candidly are this kind of very unique generational consumer pull drug
Yeah.
that, potentially had the catalyst to kind of change that equilibrium across sort of 4, 5, 6 constituents that kind of come together to make that end-to-end life cycle of a drug happen. And so we'll kind of see where we're the we are built in a way that whether it's gross prices, whether it's net prices, whether it's employer sponsored, whether the government pays for everything, whether whatever the mechanism is, um, you know, we are here to help consumers get faster, easier access to get and manage their medications. That is not going to change. A little bit of the Jeff Bezos, like, you know, it's interesting to think about what is going to change. It's also interesting to think about like what isn't going to change. What isn't going to change is people want transparency and they want simplicity, whether they're consumers or doctors. And so that's the thing that we deliver, agnostic of sort of maybe what all of the machinations of the supply chain are.
And in that specifically, what kind of what role do insurance companies have in this as well? Like where can they kind of make it, I guess, quote unquote, much more better, I guess, for the end user? Like and how, where can they play into the best effect? And are you seeing? And I know you guys work a lot very closely with, different pharmacy organizations and insurance as well. Like what are you seeing in that kind of front, and what is the push towards right now in that front as well?
Yeah, look, I mean, the insurers through pharmacy benefit managers play an enormously important role. There are three big pharmacy managers. They control, 80 to 90% of the prescriptions that get filled or paid for in the US. And so they have a very big say and influence in how this might evolve. Employers hire insurers and PBMs to provide benefits for their employees. So they have a big say in that. Drug companies make the drugs and price them. So they have a say in that. Pharmacies have a say in that because ultimately people still have to be able to get the thing in their hands. And pharmacies are the only ones that can do that. And so I don't know. I think that I think insurers have a job, and their job is to, help people get care at the right place, the right moment, but to also do that in a cost effective way. And some of that is like managing costs, right? Like that is, I think you had Mario from Oscar on the pod at some point, and
Yes.
I think he would probably tell you, yeah, he would probably tell you that, like containing costs is an important part of what an insurance company does. That's what they get hired to do.
All right. Right. And you know, so Capsule started when you had a super bad headache or something like that. Can you kind of walk me through how that kind of primed through and you found out that problem? You kind of hinted at that in the beginning, but what did that kind of look like when you kind of got that situation?
Sure. Yeah. So, like I woke up one morning on a snowy January day with this throbbing headache. I called my doctor and he asked me a series of questions and he's like, okay, you have a sinus infection, like no problem. I'll write you a prescription, go get it. And I was like, great. And so I went out on this, I went out in the snow and I went to this corner chain pharmacy on the Lower East Side where I was living. And I walked in and like literally everything you can think about going wrong went wrong. I'm like in this store. I can't even find the pharmacy. I'm walking past aisles of like candy and cleaning supplies, pharmacies in the basement. I walk down this broken escalator. I get to this dark, dingy basement, and there's like 25 people in line ahead of me. Because I'm in the basement, my cell phone doesn't have signal. I end up waiting in line for like an hour. I finally get to the counter. I ask this like really friendly, but clearly very overworked pharmacist. I'm like, hey, my doctor called in this prescription. Can you go get it? And she kind of goes to the back and comes back with this like really sad look on her face. She's like, I'm really sorry. Like, we don't have it in stock. And I'm like, okay, no problem. I'll just call my doctor, right? Like, I'll just call my doctor and have him write it somewhere else. And so I pull my cell phone out to do this. My battery has died because it's been searching for signal in the basement for like an hour. And I'm like, oh my God. So I end up going home, no medication in hand. I went to bed and I woke up the next morning and I had one of those entrepreneur moments. Like what is going on here? Like, how does this all work? And as I started unpacking that, I realized two big things. One is that the pharmacy sits at the intersection of healthcare and retail. And that this idea that I alluded to earlier, that the world of retail is changing dramatically. And pharmacy is the second largest category of retail. It's $400 or $500 billion. There's 70,000 pharmacies in the U.S. It's really big. There's a lot of them, and it hasn't changed in 100 years. And we think the world of how people are interacting with consumer commerce, as you've seen in every other category, is changing dramatically, and certainly was 10 years ago. And the other is that value-based care, which we haven't touched on as much, um, is, I think, slowly but surely taking hold. And
Yeah.
the idea that the more often you go to your doctor, the more money he makes is like a pretty bad incentive system, and that is changing, and it's going to change. And the pharmacy is the most frequent interaction point in the entire healthcare system. The average person interacts with their pharmacy 8 to 10 times more often than they do with their doctor. And so
Right.
the pharmacy has enormous role in helping support better healthcare outcomes. And we talked a little bit about how when prescriptions run through Capsule, people are more likely to get them. And there's a lot more to be done there over time as that expands. And so that was the origin. It was really sort of this personal experience, understanding the friction of the pharmacy. And then it kind of mapped back to a couple big themes that I was excited about when I was an investor. And so kind of, I think, I had my heart align around, okay, I understand the pain point like very viscerally. And I also understand the market and the business and the opportunity and how you might go about making this better. And I just got really excited about trying to make it better. And it's truly mass market. 70% of American adults go to the pharmacy at least once a month. Like it
Crazy.
impacts everybody. It's just an enormous, enormous category. And it's a pain point that I think, everyone more or less understands. Everyone's had a shit trip to the pharmacy.
Right. I mean, usually a lot of people, I mean, a lot of founders go from founder to investor. You went investor to founder, which is very common also. Like, what was your learnings from being an investor? And did you take any of those learnings to being a founder?
Oh, I think there's so many. I mean, one of the things as an investor that you have to get really comfortable with is making decisions with imperfect information, right? You never have perfect information about a company or a management team or an industry. You're doing the best you can to put a mosaic together and then make decisions quickly because investment opportunities aren't static. They change, whether it's private and there's a deal and there's a timeline on the deal, or it's public where the stock price can move. Being a founder, being in a startup, like all you're doing is making decisions with imperfect information, right? You always want more information, but time and speed are the most important weapons every startup has because you're in every other dimension, you're outmatched. Like you have fewer resources than incumbents, you have fewer industry pull than incumbents, you have less people, less domain knowledge. Like everything is less, less, less. Like the only thing you have is you have more ambition, more will, and more speed. And so I think making decisions with uncertain information is certainly something that is very applicable between being an investor and being and building and building.
Right. I mean, if you could go back, would you become an investor again? Would you be an investor now? Or like, do you see like you continuing with Capsule pretty much until the potential exit? Like, what does that look like in like 3, 5 years down the road?
I feel like I was so fortunate in the first couple jobs that I had and the firms I got to work for and the people that I work with there. I think it was just unbelievable training in business. Got to learn about a ton of different industries, got to learn how to analyze industries, got to learn how to make decisions quickly. Got to understand what does excellence look like at Bain Capital. What is really good talent look like? Like what can the bar be and what should the bar be? And so I wouldn't trade that experience for anything. I think that was like a really good place to start my career and develop just some really good foundational general business skills to do that. And, continue to be really excited about what we're building at Capsule. I think there's enormous opportunity. I think AI is unlocking so many different opportunities for us to create value for consumers and physicians. And the market is so big and it's still only 1 or 2% online. So there's a lot to come online.
Yeah.
When you look at every other category of consumer commerce, whether that's online grocery or it's apparel or whatever, they're even used cars, and so the pharmacy market is going to very rapidly, continue to move online. And I think we're right at the forefront of continuing to catalyze that transition from offline to online.
Well, what specific features did you guys have to use to kind of make it more AI centric? I mean, not obviously because of being AI, but like couple things that made it much more easier for the consumer to kind of get that prescription or get that offered education that they need.
Yeah. There's a lot of stuff on the back end, right? In terms of, one of the things that we talked about is like there's a plethora of ways that you could pay for something.
Yeah.
And as a human, you can loop through them. Should I use my insurance? Should I use a coupon? Should I not do that? What about this? What about that? Like that takes time for a human. It's probably cost prohibitive for a human to do. AI can do that very quickly. and output a recommendation for the consumer. And so that's something that, kind of a pricing engine that we've built out. Yeah. That'd
And
be like one example of that.
yeah, no, I mean, couple more questions before we go to a quick rapid fire. What was like the hardest like early decision that you had to make at Capsule? And were there any decisions that you regret making now, from like in the and like way in the early ages that could have made take Capsule to another direction?
We do not have enough time to talk about all of the mistakes that I have made
Yeah.
in building Capsule. There are a very long list. And that's, I think, part and parcel of it, right? Like you're going to make decisions
Oh
and you're
yeah,
going
for
to either
sure.
be right or wrong. And hopefully none of them are fatal. Like none of them have been fatal, to do that. And you kind of learn from them and try to get better at the next time. But you're always working with imperfect information. I think making a decision is better. Making a bad decision quickly is better than making no decision at all, right? Like I think
That's
that's
true.
generally proven to be true. I think there are two things that I would share, maybe a little bit general rather than specific. I think recognizing that you've made the wrong hire, even today, just is always a tough acknowledgement and decision to sort of make. And being able to do that in a really respectful way and appreciating that, failure is always joint ventured. It's never the individual. It's very rarely the individual you hired's fault. It's generally like somewhere along the way there was a miscalibration around something. And I think in the early days, when you don't have as many repetitions of doing that, those are really difficult decisions to make. Because also, like, if you have 8 people on the team and one person's, it's different than if you have 1,000 people on the team and
Yeah.
one person. So I'd say that those are really hard decisions. I'd say the other thing, just for me personally, is, at least as a first time founder, you start building your team out, and then all the people you have hired are successful, they're ambitious, and they have all worked at other places with their own culture, and they have worked for managers and leaders. And inevitably, like, so if you kind of think about it, let's say you have 5 or 10 people on your early team, and all of them have maybe worked at 2 or 3 places before. So now you've got 30 different perspectives on culture and how things should work and what the role, how the CEO should act and how the founder should act. Right. And everyone sort of has an opinion on that. And I think ultimately, like, you kind of have to find your own way and your own authentic style, kind of be open for suggestion and getting better and learning,
Yeah.
but not being able to be a flag in the wind where, you can cater to everybody. Like you kind of have to stand for the values and the principles and the way you're going to operate, and obviously get feedback and get better and understand how that impacts people and the success. But I think finding that sort of authentic path is a little bit of a journey. At least it was for me in terms of being a first time founder. And every company is different and every leader is different. And I don't know that there's a right way. We have a board member that has worked for Jeff Bezos directly, for Steve Jobs directly, and for Larry Ellison directly. And, they all have really different styles, and all those companies are enormously successful. And, a lot of it is just what's authentic to you as a leader. And the sooner that first time founders find what that is, the better, I think.
Right. Are there any hiring mistakes that you've made and that you learned from?
Yes, many.
What were those red flags that you wish you could have seen but you didn't see?
I think it's fairly like red flags, right? I don't think like usually it's a miscalibration of like, I'll answer that question differently. Like one of the things that I find really useful when hiring is understanding what people's most successful project or moment has been in their career, because whatever that work environment was is usually the mental model that someone has for how they like to work and do their best work. And so an example would be if you and I were, if I were interviewing somebody and they said, hey, like the most successful project I did was when my manager or my boss gave me a project to do and he never checked in with me. And 1 quarter later, I just came back and had the thing done and we didn't interact, in that quarter. That's great. But if you have a company that, or you have a management philosophy or a system that says, hey, we iterate rapidly. And so like we want to check in every day or every week. That person could be the most talented person in the world. But if their mental model of success is give me a problem and go away and I'll come back with a solution in 3 months, and your company operates on like, let's check in on how things are going every week so we can stay calibrated and aligned because the world is changing fast. Like, it doesn't matter how talented that person is.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter how good of a leader and a manager you are. Like, that's just never going to work because there's just a miscalibration around what sets up the cadence at which the company operates and what that person has a view on how they do their best work. Right. And there's like a lot of different ways that can manifest. But I would say it's very rarely on hiring mistakes. Like, we missed that this person, this person was less ambitious or less talented than we thought. And it's usually about like the work environment that enables this person to be their very best self is actually just different from the work environment that we have.
Yeah. And a quick question before we go to a rapid fire. What were the biggest lessons you took away from working with Thrive? And I'm assuming you're still working with them. Any specific kind of lessons that you've learned from their kind of that investment team so far?
And sure. I mean, we have been fortunate to have a really wonderful set of investors. And so
Yeah.
Thrive have been really integral in the early days of getting the business up and scaled. And the team there is amazing. Everything from strategy to talent introductions to customer introductions, really, really high caliber, super phenomenal, really invested in the companies that they invest in and the founders that they back. So it has been a real pleasure learning from them and seeing them grow their business, over time.
Yeah.
And then we also have other folks that are playing a different, a different stage. Folks like Durable and Bailey Gifford, which are, world class crossover public-private investors and incredibly thoughtful about what companies look like as they transition from private to public. We brought in a firm called Cox Enterprises a handful of years ago. Really unique setup. It's permanent capital. It's a company that's 125 years old. Really big. Really big entity, and enables us to think super long term. Like, we can think about the business on a different time scale because they themselves think about their own business on a different time scale. And so I think we've been really fortunate to be able to have people that just really care about us and the team and the business and the mission that we're on.
Yeah.
But
No, yeah, that's amazing. Like, I mean, yeah, going to like a quick rapid fire. You ready?
ready, let's go.
Yeah. If someone wanted to fix a broken piece of healthcare as you did with pharmacies, what is the single step they should take first, like right now? Like, and, kind of piggybacking that question as well is what specific sectors in healthcare do you think are the most underappreciated as well?
On the first one, I would just get out in the world and go talk to people that have problems,
Okay.
whatever that is. I don't know if it's underappreciated or not. The thing that I have a lot of personal fascination with is synthetic biology, particularly as like sort of advances in computing start intersecting with, biology. Like, the ability to accelerate discovery of new drug molecules, I think, is going to be really cool. And I think that's become more appreciated over the last couple of years, but that's an area I've been fascinated with for many, many years.
What specific metric when you wake up in the morning gets you the most excited to work on Capsule?
The thing that gets me most excited to work on Capsule is when I see positive customer reviews, which isn't a metric, but when I see like real people talking about how Capsule has made their day or their life better. And that could be something small, like we saved a busy mom time from having to drag her toddlers to the pharmacy. And
Yeah.
that can be something that feels more emotional, like an elderly person who lives on a fifth floor walk up that actually just physically can't get to the pharmacy, and we're helping that person, stay on their medication regimen and everything in between. That's the number one thing that gets me out of bed. I would say that, to answer your question, that probably shows up in retention and NPS.
Yeah. Maybe if you could fix like a broken thing, I guess, in traditional pharmacies tomorrow, what would that be? And I know there's
I mean,
probably a lot.
that would, well, I mean, I think we have fixed all the things that
Yeah,
are
you guys
broken with
have.
traditional
But like,
pharmacy.
is there anything that you guys think that did not fix that you wish that you had like a magic wand? Okay, this needs to be like done tomorrow.
I think that there is a lot of I wish that data were more freely accessible across all of the different silos of healthcare. So that could be like drug pricing data, that could be like what is the like formulary data, like what does this cost across Medicare, Medicaid, commercial insurance. Like, I wish the data that can enable people to build really robust tools that can help people make better decisions both clinically and financially. I wish that data were less gate kept and more accessible to all participants and not just like, there being these like really weird data rights around certain people can get certain data at certain times, I think is a real disservice to the broader ecosystem.
Right. I mean, what is the single non-obvious lesson from building Capsule right now to what it is now, like a unicorn right now? What is that kind of non-obvious lesson that you take away?
I think the non-obvious lesson is uh the non-obvious lesson is that well, the obvious lesson, the obvious lesson is that
The hard
healthcare takes
question.
patience and capital,
Yeah.
and that's the obvious lesson. Um, I think the non-obvious lesson is that I think that you're going to be able to build. I think there are going to be pockets of healthcare that have enormous. Actually, you'll edit this out, right? So you'll clean this up. I'm assuming.
Oh, for sure.
Well, you'll have to clean it up now. The non-obvious lesson is I saw a chart that I think is really interesting that was not obvious to me, and I think it's from Bessemer, and it basically said that EMRs took 17 years to get to like 80% adoption and penetration, and that AI scribes in like 3 years have gotten to like 60% or 70% adoption. And so my non-obvious lesson is that I think that because the first wave of AI technologies in healthcare have been so overwhelmingly positively received by physicians and clinicians because they're creating real value. I think it has opened a window into being able to create solutions that deliver real outcomes. And there's an appetite for adoption in a way that, like, I think 10 years ago, people were really skeptical of like the next healthcare IT tool that no one wanted to adopt because there have just been
Absolutely.
so many shitty technology solutions. I think that has changed. And I think that's not obvious, at least what the EMR, the delta in EMR penetration, where the government literally had to pay people to adopt EMRs versus the adoption you're seeing in scribes, I think is pretty non-obvious. Now,
Right.
whether anything ends up being a good business or not, I don't know. But those are like real adoption numbers that I think are good for the system and for clinicians.
Right. Final question. How do you balance building an amazing company that you are now with personal life, if at all?
I'm a believer in like work-life integration. And so when I'm happy at work, I'm happy in my personal life. And when I'm happy in my personal life, I'm happy at work. And those things are pretty intertwined for me and have been for a long time.
Do you see a lot of times that your stress from work kind of correlates to the stress in your personal life as well, and kind of that kind of seen as well, or has that not been an effect, and you're pretty good at balancing each one?
Uh, I generally try to not have lots of stress in my life.
Yeah.
Is like the thing I'm working. This is a thing that I is a journey that I'm. That's probably the number one sort of like you know thing that I'm working on now is just having an appreciation for what is like really having like paying attention to your body and really understanding like what are the emotions that are coming up for you, anger, shame, guilt, fear, and letting them move through your body in a way that then your body is able to fully process those emotions, whether that's in my personal life or at work.
Dude, it's amazing to have you on the show, and I enjoyed this so much. I mean, it was literally a pure joy. So thank you so much for being here. I truly appreciate it.
Thank you. This is fun. Appreciate it.